Alright, so we want to learn in this video how to create the list of residuals and then to also graph the residual graph and then to get the standard deviation of the residuals. So the first thing, to get the residual list, all you have to do is go to Stats, Calc, and then choose 8, the linear regression A plus BX. And the second you get all the data that you would normally get, from that, you will also create a residual list. So just go to Stat, Calc, down to 8, and create your list. Once you've created the list, again, all you do is go to the second stat. Actually, let me just show you. So go to second stat, and you'll see at the bottom you have residuals at number 7. So we're going to use that now to store the residuals. So now that we see where it is, again, second stat and then pick 7. And then we'll hit on the bottom left the store key and we'll create a list by hitting second 5, which will create L5. So first thing I do is I go to second stat, which gets me the list, number 7. And down at the bottom left, there's the store button, press it, and then second 5 gives me L5, press enter, and that'll enter the residuals. Remember, the residuals, you may recall, are just the Y values minus their predictions for each one. So this is, in this case, I have a list of 5 values in L1 and L2 representing the explanatory variable and the response variable. So I've put that data into L5. So the next thing we want to do to graph is we want to make sure we turn off plot 1 and we turn on plot 2 and place L5 in the Y list. And then we'll graph. We may have to zoom in. We'll see. So first thing, I go to second plot and make sure that L1 is off. If it isn't, just make the cursor, move the cursor over to off, and then go back to plot and move down to L2 and turn L2 on. And in the Y list, just make sure you hit second 5 and enter, and then graph. Now, if your graph doesn't show up, hit on to stop some automatic things if you have this type of backlit calculator, and just hit zoom, and 9 is zoom stat, and so that gives us our graph. Now that is actually to determine whether the linear regression line is actually an appropriate model for the data. When we look at the graph of the residuals, when you get, basically that's at 0, that horizontal line, the residuals themselves are kind of randomly spread out around it. That's basically a good sign that the linear model actually is a good fit. So that's basically how we graph the residual plot, the plot of the residuals. The next thing that can be useful for determining if the linear model, the linear regression model, is a good fit is the standard deviation of the residuals. Now this is a really complicated calculation. Fortunately for us, we have the residuals already in L5. So what we're going to do is we're going to store, we need to square basically the residuals. So we will square L5 and then store that in L4. So I'll show you how to do that. So on the calculator, I'm going to take second 5, which gives me L5, and there is a square key, and I'm just going to press that. That squares every piece of data in L5, and I'm going to store that, the store key, in second 4, which is L4. And so every one of those values is now squared. And so that gives me this portion. It basically will create all of these squares of the residuals. We divide that by n minus 2. Since n is 5 in our case, n minus 2 is going to be 3, so we'll end up dividing by 3. So what I'm going to do is go to list and sum. So first, create the square root. So the square root button is second square. So hit the square key and the second key first, and then the square, and add the square root. I want the sum. So the way that we get the sum is we go to list, which was second stat, and choose math, and then number 5 is sum. So we'll do that on the calculator. And so I go to second stat, which is list, arrow over to math, and number 5 is sum. So choose 5 or arrow down. So I have sum, and I want to put L4 there, so I hit second 4. Close the parentheses, divide by n minus 2, which is 3, and that will give me the standard deviation of the residuals. And that is everything we need to know for the residuals. We will talk next class about R squared, but that happens automatically when we get R and the linear regression model. So I hope this helps.